Atlanta buzzes with Monday morning chaos, coffee, honking horns, frustrated commuters, just another routine day. Jasmine Carter steps out of her sleek black sedan, heels clicking against the pavement. A woman on a mission, exuding confidence. She's 5 steps from the courthouse entrance when, "Hey, hands up!" She turns, 2 white officers, hands hovering over their holsters. Sergeant Rick Daly and Officer Connor Brooks. Different faces, same playbook. Daly steps forward, chest puffed, voice sharp. "Ma'am, put the bag down and step back." Jasmine tilts her head, a flicker of amusement in her eyes. "Excuse me?" Brooks scans her up and down like she's a walking crime. "You match the description of a suspect in fraudulent government activity." Jasmine lets the words hang. Then, a slow, humorless laugh. "Black woman. Nice suit, carrying important-looking papers. Yeah, real dangerous." Daly doesn't blink. "Just cooperate, ma'am." Jasmine sighs. "I work here. They don't care." Handcuffs click. Jasmine doesn't resist, because she's not playing their game. She's about to flip the whole board. The holding cell smelled like sweat, cheap bleach, and bad decisions. The walls were dull gray, chipped in places where time and neglect had worn them down. The metal bench beneath Jasmine Carter was cold and uncomfortable, but she sat with perfect posture, hands folded neatly in her lap. She wasn't panicked, she wasn't afraid, she was listening. Right outside the cell, Sergeant Rick Daly and Officer Connor Brooks stood near the duty desk, whispering in hushed tones. They weren't being careful. They thought she was just another suspect with nowhere to go, nothing to fight back with. "She had the documents on her," Brooks muttered. "If we spin this right, we can make it stick." Daly exhaled sharply, sounding irritated but calculating. "Forgery and impersonating a federal officer. No jury's going to second-guess that. Just say she tried to pass off those clearance files as real." Jasmine's fingers tightened slightly on her knee. "Oh. So that was their play. They weren't just trying to arrest her. They were trying to destroy her." She closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting their words sink in, not because she was scared, but because she was exhausted. Exhausted of the same script, the same recycled lies. She had studied men like Daly. She had exposed them, dismantled them. But this time, she was their target. "She's a nobody," Daly scoffed. "The judge will believe us. They always do." Jasmine let out a slow breath, measured and calm. A nobody? She could almost laugh. Daly and Brooks didn't realize they had just stepped into the biggest mistake of their lives. She wasn't some rookie who would break down at the first sign of injustice. She wasn't just another black woman railroaded by a system designed to chew her up and spit her out. She was so much more than that. She leaned back slightly against the cold wall, listening as the officers continued digging their own graves. Every word they muttered, every smug assumption, was another nail in their coffin. They were doing her job for her. Then, the front doors of the precinct slammed open. The sound echoed like a gunshot. A heavy silence fell over the station as footsteps approached. Steady, controlled, powerful. Jasmine tilted her head just slightly, eyes flicking toward the door of the holding area. She already knew who it was. "Where is she?" A deep, commanding voice cut through the air like a blade. The officers at the front desk hesitated. One of them gulped audibly. Sergeant Daly's spine stiffened as Marcus Bell stepped into the room. Jasmine smirked, just the slightest hint of amusement playing at the corner of her lips. Showtime. The door to the holding area slammed open like a thunderclap, making everyone in the precinct jump. Conversations died instantly. The air thickened with something unspoken. Even the officers at the front desk sat up straighter, eyes darting toward the entrance like they already knew. This was about to be a problem. Enter Marcus Bell. Tall, broad-shouldered, and radiating authority, he wasn't just wearing a suit, he owned it. Charcoal gray, tailored to perfection, crisp white shirt underneath. His tie wasn't loosened, his stance wasn't casual. Every inch of him demanded respect, and he wasn't here to ask for favors. Sergeant Rick Daly turned, jaw tightening when he saw who had arrived. Officer Connor Brooks stiffened beside him. Neither spoke, but their faces said it all. They hadn't expected this. Marcus didn't spare them a glance. His cold, sharp gaze locked directly onto Jasmine, who remained seated, perfectly composed, as if she'd been expecting him the whole time. "She's coming with me," Marcus said smoothly. "Not a request. A fact." Daly straightened, trying to regain control. "She's facing serious charges." Marcus's expression didn't change. "Serious? You sure about that?" He reached into his sleek black briefcase and pulled out a thick folder, bound and official. With a casual flick of his wrist, he slid it onto the desk in front of Daly like he was placing a loaded weapon on the table. Daly frowned but picked it up, flipping through the pages. His face drained of color before he even got halfway. Brooks leaned over his shoulder, reading along, and swallowed hard. Jasmine smirked. "You were saying?" Daly snapped the folder shut. His hands curled into fists, but he forced his voice to stay even. "What is this?" Marcus leaned in slightly, voice low and dangerous. "Oh, just a little something from the Department of Justice. You know, the agency that actually authorizes federal security clearances." Daly's nostrils flared. Brooks took a nervous step back. This doesn't mean anything," Daly insisted, his voice losing its edge. Marcus arched a brow. "Doesn't it?" He turned slightly, addressing the entire precinct now. "Because from what I see, my client, who, by the way, was unlawfully detained, was about to be framed by two officers who thought no one would notice." The room tensed. Officers exchanged uneasy glances. Jasmine finally stood, straightening her blazer with leisurely confidence. She looked at Daly, then Brooks, shaking her head slightly. "Wow," she said, voice smooth as silk. "You really thought this was going to work, huh?" Daly clenched his jaw. Brooks looked like he wanted to disappear. Marcus smiled. Not friendly. Not warm. "Here's how this is going to go," he said, voice like a blade. And just like that, the game had changed. The air in the Thompson Federal Courthouse was thick with tension. Reporters lined the back wall, whispering urgently, cameras flashing every few seconds. Court officials shuffled papers, pretending to be focused, but even they could feel it. This was no ordinary case. At the defense table, Daly and Brooks sat rigid, their backs straight, their faces frozen in practiced neutrality. But their hands? Twitching. Fingers flexing, knuckles white. They weren't used to being on this side of the room. The large double doors at the back swung open. The shift in the room was instant. Whispers rippled. Heads turned. Even Judge Harris, a seasoned woman who had seen it all, looked up with mild curiosity. Jasmine Carter walked in. No cuffs, no escort, no fear. She didn't hesitate, didn't rush. Her steps were measured, deliberate, powerful. She moved like she owned the space. Because today, she did. Daly stiffened. Brooks swallowed hard. Jasmine walked past them, her heels tapping against the polished floor in a slow, steady rhythm, like the ticking of a countdown clock. She didn't look at them. She didn't need to. She reached the prosecution table, adjusted her blazer, and met Judge Harris's gaze without blinking. "Miss Carter," the judge said, flipping through the case file. "I understand you have something to present before the court." Jasmine nodded once. She reached into her blazer. Brooks flinched. Actually flinched. Daly clenched his jaw, shoulders tensing as if preparing for impact. Jasmine pulled out a small ID badge and placed it on the desk. Silence. Then, gasps. The judge's brows lifted ever so slightly. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Reporters scrambled to jot notes. Daly and Brooks? Stone still. Judge Harris picked up the badge, inspecting it carefully. Her expression remained unreadable, but her eyes flickered with realization. "You're telling me," she said slowly, addressing Jasmine, "that this document is legitimate?" Jasmine didn't smile, didn't gloat, didn't need to. "Yes, Your Honor," she said smoothly. "That is my official clearance identification, issued by the Central Intelligence Agency." The room exploded. A wave of shocked whispers rushed through the courtroom. Someone cursed under their breath. A reporter nearly dropped their pen. Daly paled. Brooks stopped breathing. Judge Harris tapped her gavel twice. Order. The room hushed, but the electricity in the air remained. The judge turned her sharp gaze back to Jasmine. You are claiming under oath that you are a CIA operative? Jasmine exhaled slowly, tilting her head just slightly. Claiming? She repeated, voice soft but dangerous. She reached into her bag, pulled out another document, and slid it across the desk. The judge picked it up, eyes widening. Jasmine leaned in, voice smooth as silk. Your Honor, I don't claim things. The weight of Jasmine's words sank into the room like a depth charge. The moment she placed her CIA clearance badge on the judge's desk, the courtroom became a powder keg ready to explode. Judge Harris picked up the badge with both hands, flipping it over, inspecting every detail. Her eyes widened. Miss Carter, you have CIA clearance? A stunned hush rippled through the courtroom. At the defense table, Daly and Brooks sat frozen. Daly's face drained of color, his usual arrogant smirk completely wiped clean. Brooks looked like he was trying not to throw up. Jasmine gave a slow, deliberate nod, her expression unreadable. That's correct, Your Honor. Murmurs exploded across the gallery. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashed, and people leaned forward as if this was a movie. Judge Harris exhaled sharply. Jasmine wasn't done. Not only did they unlawfully detain me, she said smoothly, her voice cutting through the chaos, but they also tried to obstruct a federal investigation. Boom. The courtroom erupted. A reporter cursed under his breath. A juror's mouth fell open. Daly twitched like he wanted to object. But what was left to say? Judge Harris's gavel slammed down. Order! Order in this courtroom! The murmurs died instantly, but the electricity in the air remained. The judge turned back to Jasmine. Are you telling this court that you were actively conducting an investigation when these officers detained you? Jasmine's dark eyes locked onto Daly and Brooks. That's exactly what I'm saying, Your Honor. A collective gasp. Brooks made a strangled noise, barely managing to find his voice. That's not possible, he stammered. She never said... Because you never gave me the chance, Jasmine cut in coldly. Daly's hands clenched into fists. His breathing was sharp and uneven now, the walls closing in. Your Honor, he tried, but the judge wasn't looking at him anymore. She was already flipping through new documents Jasmine had placed on her desk. Then, she found it. Her face darkened. Slowly, she set the paper down and turned toward the prosecutor's table. This court will now proceed with criminal charges against Sergeant Daly and Officer Brooks, she declared, her voice like a gavel hitting a coffin lid. The courtroom exploded. Daly jerked back in shock, his mouth opening but no words coming out. Brooks let out a wheezing breath, as if someone had punched the air from his lungs. Jasmine! She didn't smirk. She didn't gloat. She simply leaned back in her chair, folded her hands, and watched as the walls of their world collapsed around them. Daly's face twitched with barely restrained panic. His hands gripped the edges of the defense table so hard his knuckles went white. We were just doing our job, he blurted out, voice sharp with desperation. She was acting suspicious. Brooks nodded frantically, seizing onto any lifeline. Exactly. We had reasonable suspicion. She never identified herself. Jasmine raised a single eyebrow. The courtroom fell silent. Judge Harris exhaled, rubbing her temples. Miss Carter, did you present any form of identification before being detained? Jasmine's lips curled into something cold, something deadly. Of course I did, Your Honor. Daly and Brooks visibly stiffened. And let me guess, the judge said, her tone growing icier by the second. They ignored it? Jasmine didn't even need to answer. The entire courtroom already knew. The prosecutor, who had been sitting quietly up until now, stood suddenly. His face was hard, his eyes unreadable. But there was something in his stance that spelled doom for the two officers. Your Honor, he said, given the new evidence, the state moves to press full criminal charges against Sergeant Daly and Officer Brooks for obstruction of justice, falsifying police reports, and unlawful detainment. Daly's entire body locked up. Brooks shook his head wildly, eyes darting around the room. Wait, this is insane. We were following protocol. Judge Harris didn't even look at them. She turned her gaze to the representatives from the Atlanta Police Department, seated at the back of the courtroom. "Do you wish to make a statement regarding your officers?" she asked. The APD chief, a sharp-eyed man in a navy suit, stood. He cleared his throat, and with one sentence, Daly and Brooks were erased. "The department has no affiliation with their actions. We will not be protecting them from the consequences of their choices." The final nail in the coffin. Brooks collapsed into his chair. His breathing came out in sharp, short bursts. Daly? He just stared forward. Silent. Judge Harris nodded. "Then it is the order of this court that Sergeant Rick Daly and Officer Connor Brooks are immediately stripped of their badges and placed under investigation." A stunned silence. Then, gasps. A bailiff stepped forward. "Sergeant Daly, Officer Brooks, please rise." Brooks visibly shook as he obeyed. Daly? He didn't move at first. But then, as if finally understanding that his reign was over, he stood stiffly, jaw tight. The badges were ripped from their uniforms, live, in front of the entire courtroom. Reporters furiously typed, cameras flashed, and Jasmine Carter? She just watched. No satisfaction, no gloating. Just quiet. Final justice. The moment Judge Harris slammed her gavel, the world outside had already changed. Within minutes, news headlines exploded across every major network. CIA agent destroys corrupt cops in court. You won't believe how. They framed her. Then she showed her badge. Officers Daly and Brooks exposed, arrested in real time. The courtroom footage. Jasmine's calm, calculated reveal. The instant shift in power. The sheer panic on Daly and Brooks' faces spread like wildfire. Clips flooded Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. Millions watched, millions shared. By the end of the day, number Jasmine Carter was trending worldwide. Meanwhile, Daly and Brooks? They were done. Their mugshots were all over the news, their careers obliterated overnight. A video loop of Brooks flinching as Jasmine pulled out her badge became an internet meme. "FBI, open up. Oh wait, it's me now." Jasmine Carter just turned Daly and Brooks into a case study. Imagine trying to frame a CIA agent. Dumbest criminals of the year. Daly's attempt to defend himself? A disaster. A leaked prison interview showed his utter disbelief. "We didn't know who she was," the internet laughed. "Yeah, that's kind of the point, buddy. She let you bury yourselves first, then flipped the whole game." Jasmine Carter gave them the silence treatment until it was too late. The Atlanta Police Department had no choice. A press conference was called within 24 hours. Their chief stepped up to the podium, flanked by senior officers. Cameras flashed, microphones angled forward. The nation watched. A reporter fired the first question. "Do you stand by Sergeant Daly and Officer Brooks?" The chief exhaled, then delivered the final blow. "The Atlanta Police Department does not condone the actions of these officers. Effective immediately, they have been terminated and are under federal investigation." Boom. The final nail in the coffin. Jasmine, meanwhile, kept her silence. She refused to do any interviews. She let the story speak for itself. But when a respected journalist from 60 Minutes reached out, she made an exception. One interview. It aired that Sunday night. The reporter leaned forward. "Miss Carter, what do you want people to take away from this?" Jasmine took a steady breath, her eyes sharp, unwavering. "This isn't about me. It's about accountability." The reporter nodded. "And what do you say to those who believe this is just one case in a much larger issue?" Jasmine's answer? Unshakable. "Then let's make it bigger." The interview ended there. But the impact? It was just getting started. By the next morning, civil rights groups, activists, and legal organizations called for a full investigation into APD practices. Jasmine Carter wasn't just a name anymore. She was a movement. And Daly and Brooks. They weren't just ex-cops. They were a warning. Play stupid games. win life-changing consequences. And as Jasmine watched the chaos unfold from the comfort of her sleek black sedan, she simply smirked. Checkmate. The sun blazed high over Atlanta as Jasmine Carter stepped out of the courthouse. Victorious, unshaken, unstoppable. Behind her, the echoes of Judge Harris's gavel still hung in the air, the final ruling that sent Daly and Brooks crashing down. Reporters were already waiting. Cameras flashed wildly. Microphones extended in every direction. "Miss Carter, a word, please." "Jasmine, how does it feel to take down corrupt officers? What's next for you?" She paused, adjusting the strap of her leather briefcase, her sharp gaze sweeping the chaos. For a moment, she let them wonder. Then, a small smirk played at her lips. "Fixing the system." The reporters erupted into more questions, their voices blending into a blur. "Jasmine?" She was already done talking. She turned without another word, stepping off the courthouse stairs. She didn't have time for cameras, not when there were so many more battles ahead. Meanwhile, inside the courthouse, Judge Harris sat alone in his chambers, the faint hum of the television filling the silence. The screen flickered with Jasmine's image, confident, untouchable. The reporters' voices echoed. "Fixing the system." Judge Harris exhaled, rubbing his temples. This woman. She wasn't just some attorney. She wasn't just a victim. She was something bigger. A force. A reckoning. A name that would haunt the corrupt for years to come. He had underestimated her. So had the cops. So had the entire system that thought it could bury her. And now, she was the one holding the shovel. Across town, Jasmine entered a sleek, glass-walled building. Inside, a team of legal experts, journalists, and former whistleblowers waited. A woman stepped forward. "We've been waiting for you." Jasmine nodded, setting her briefcase down on the table. "Then let's get started." She wasn't done, not even close. Because for every Daly and Brooks taken down, there were dozens more still out there. Judges, cops, CEOs, senators, the entire corrupt machine. And if they thought Jasmine Carter was going to let it slide, they had no idea what was coming. That night, as she sat alone in her office reviewing the next case, her phone buzzed. A private number. She picked up, a deep voice on the other end. "You made a lot of enemies today, Carter." Jasmine smirked, leaning back in her chair. "Good." She ended the call. And just like that, her next mission began.